And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight-up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, you know, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
Bill Maher just went off on Zohran Mamdani, and the whole thing is pure entertainment. The late-night host tore into the New York lawmaker's ultra-progressive vision, joking that his win feels like a campaign ad for conservatives. Maher's takedown isn't gentle. It's sharp, nonstop, and brutally funny. Blink and you might miss the chaos. Seriously, grab some popcorn right now.
Who's the most popular politician on the left?
AOC? I don't know.
One of, but who's, you know, Bernie is,
Bernie, yeah.
Bernie is, I mean, he's not a capitalist, you know?
No, he's not. And he's also not president.
He's not, but
never would be.
But neither is Mamdani.
No, but he will, trust me, he will be featured in the campaign commercials.
But they're going to feature people, they boogeyman everybody.
Yeah, but you don't have to boogeyman him. He does it to himself.
Maher's not wrong. Republicans don't have to invent a scary version of Mamdani when he steps into that role himself every time he speaks. With Mamdani gaining momentum in the New York mayoral race, critics say his rise could be a political jackpot for the GOP, like a bright neon sign flashing that Democrats are drifting into ideological fantasy land. Mamdani says he's simply a democratic socialist, but that message mostly lands with his own supporters. And Maher, he's not buying it. To him, Mamdani represents that wide-eyed left-wing idealism that may sound noble, but ends up handing conservatives a perfectly packaged talking point.
This must be horrible for a guy like you, who you spent your whole life talking about how government tries to do too much, which it does, and spends too much. And here you have Trump, who is the Republican, who is aggrandizing more power than anybody, as we just talked about. And on the other side, you have the guy running in New York, Mamdani, right? Okay, who's like a straight-up communist. I mean, he is. He talks about, you know, the things that communists say. I mean, he wants free grocery stores, free buses.
I want him to win.
You want him to win?
Yeah.
At first glance, the pitch shines with a utopian glow, full of warm promises and magazine cover optimism. But once you start tugging at the seams, the fantasy quickly turns into something far more uneasy. Sure, dreamers may be impressed, but to anyone familiar with socialist experiments that fell apart, it starts to feel like history repeating itself, just dressed up as progress and hope.
I think every 20 years or so.
Wait.
We need every 20 years or so, we need a conspicuous, confined experiment with socialism so we can crack it up again. Socialist slogan used to be, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. The new socialist slogan is, trust us, this time it won't be a mess.
Socialist projects have stumbled so often that many people treat the ideology like a stove they've already burned their hand on. Still, some younger audiences are drawn in by polished promises of fairness and free-for-all futures. The issue isn't just selfishness, it's human behavior itself. People tend to respond to challenge, incentive, and the sense that effort and ideas actually matter. Remove competition and flatten rewards, and momentum starts to fade. Bureaucracy grows. Inefficiency creeps in. A system meant to deliver equality can slowly turn into a cycle of waste and frustration. History has made that lesson loud and clear. When the state takes control of everything, the system often strains under its own weight. Mamdani's proposals, with expanded state programs and broad public control, may sound appealing on paper, but critics argue they become far more complicated in practice. Without space to build, trade, and innovate freely, progress can slow down. And eventually, equality risks coming not as shared prosperity, but as shared disappointment.
When the post-war Labour government in Britain was about to get started, one of their leading lights was a socialist named Nurian Bevan. He said, what could go wrong? He said, we have a nation bedded on coal, surrounded by fish. It would take an organizational genius to have a shortage of either. In 3 years, they had a shortage of both.
Britain is often pointed to as a cautionary example. In the early 20th century, parts of the country embraced socialist-leaning policies, promising fairness, shared prosperity, and a more level playing field for all citizens. On paper, it sounded bold and humane. But over time, critics argue that the vision lost momentum. Key industries brought under state control became weighed down by bureaucracy. Efficiency dropped, costs rose, and economic growth slowed. The promise of equality didn't necessarily lift everyone up. It often coincided with stagnation that affected much of the population. By the 1970s, Britain was widely described as the sick man of Europe, reflecting its economic struggles. Later, under Margaret Thatcher, market-oriented reforms were introduced, which supporters say helped revive competitiveness and restore economic momentum.
Beyond saying that we're going to make a sanctuary city for LGBTQIA plus New Yorkers, beyond saying that we're going to establish an office of LGBTQIA plus affairs, is also that we're going to provide $65 million in funding for gender-affirming care, the same amount of funding that the federal government threatened to pull out from local providers for that kind of work.
Maher is concerned that Mamdani could serve as a political trapdoor for Democrats, potentially diverting the party from its central position and into more serious difficulties. He believes that when Democrats shift too far left, they risk losing moderate voters who often decide elections. Some voters, critics argue, backed Donald Trump as a reaction to what they saw as progressive overreach, including heated debates around youth gender-affirming care. Mamdani, however, appears willing to step right back into that cultural conflict. Critics say he is backing major private fundraising efforts tied to these issues, further intensifying one of the most emotionally charged debates in American politics. Some Democrats who prioritize pragmatism over ideological purity view Mamdani's approach as risky rather than bold. It hands Republicans a ready-made argument that the left has drifted away from common sense, practical priorities, and everyday voter concerns.
He has attacked you personally and publicly like this.
He's not a socialist. He's a communist, okay? This is not a socialist, man. This is a communist.
I don't like to see a communist become mayor, I will tell you that.
I call him my little communist. He's my little communist mayor. We should never be in a position where we're talking about a communist.
We're going to end up with a communist mayor. It's not even believable, my beautiful New York. I think if a communist takes over New York City, I think that's a gift to the Republican Party.
No sugarcoating it. Donald Trump doesn't need to portray Mamdani as a political specter. Mamdani manages the theatrics perfectly well. He's floated ideas like government-run grocery stores and free citywide transit, a vision where the state plays a major role in shaping everyday life. And while he describes himself as a democratic socialist, critics say his cadence and proposals lean close to a far-left playbook that makes some people uneasy. Fair intentions or not, the platform fits neatly into the broader argument that Democrats are drifting towards socialism. And if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, well, you know the rest.
This vision of democratic socialism, it's one that often comes back to what Martin Luther King said decades ago. A vision of, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, there must be a better distribution of wealth for all of God's children in this country. Here in New York City, wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, 1 in 4 are in poverty. 500,000 kids go to sleep hungry every night. It's untenable to live with this kind of a divide. We have to actually have a politics that puts working people first.
A curious thing happens when you zoom in. Zohran Mamdani's pitch might sound shiny and new to some, but critics say it often echoes familiar political slogans from years past. Lofty promises of fairness, equal opportunity, and shared prosperity, wrapped in polished language and selective examples meant to inspire confidence. But history, they argue, tends to follow a predictable pattern. Once the applause fades and power settles in, the polished image can start to crack. Policies meant to reshape the system can end up restricting growth and slowing down enterprise. Critics say that's not the direction New York or the broader United States needs. In their view, the country's strength comes from the freedom to build, compete, innovate, and pursue opportunity rather than tightly managed systems or enforced uniformity. From that perspective, betting against the economic formula that powered American growth rarely ends well. If history is any guide, they argue, the outcome doesn't change much. And Bill Maher, ever the skeptic behind the jokes, sees that risk coming from a mile away.
I want to speak to the memory of my aunt. Who stopped taking the subway after September 11th because she did not feel safe in her hijab.
Well, it wasn't so much his aunt as his dad's cousin, but, semantics. Douglas, is he ready to lead?
No, in absolutely no way is he ready to lead, and that was just another reminder of it. This is such a self-involved little narcissist with so little going for him.
And that's the playbook, isn't it? Build slightly polished, emotionally charged stories designed to pull at feelings and gather support. It's an old political tactic, just refined and made more presentable over time. For Democrats who are fluent in identity-focused storytelling, Mamdani's narrative fits neatly. Sentimental, symbolic, wrapped in moral language, and presented as progress driven by empathy. Supporters are likely to frame him as a voice for the unheard and a moral guide for the city. But critics who look past the soft focus framing and carefully shaped messaging see something different. They aren't convinced by poetic speeches or curated personal stories. From their perspective, emotional storytelling isn't the same as effective leadership. Mamdani's story may appeal strongly to idealists, but to pragmatists it can look more like performance, well delivered and emotionally tuned, yet lacking depth where concrete substance should be.
But he even decides to turn the memory of 9/11 and the 3,000 Americans that day into a story about his aunt and the subway. It's interesting, like so many things that this smarmy candidate does, he makes it about himself and it all turns out to be untrue anyway. It seems to the extent that he had any such aunt in question, she wasn't in New York at the time, and in any case, didn't wear the headscarf.
Turns out that warm, glowing origin story around Mamdani doesn't look quite as polished when you examine it up close. Yet in deep blue New York, politics often follows different rules. Loyalty can matter as much as scrutiny, and he looks positioned to move forward despite the questions already forming around his narrative. The real suspense isn't just whether he wins, but what happens when campaign rhetoric meets the harsh reality of governing one of the world's most complex cities. Slogans are easy. Running New York is an entirely unique challenge. Mamdani's handling of that pressure will be closely followed. His rise, critics say, isn't necessarily a clear victory for progress. They see it more as a warning sign. Behind the polished speeches and carefully framed socialist messaging sits an ideology that they argue has struggled historically in practice. For that reason, alarm bells are ringing for some. If Mamdani steers New York in that direction, they warn the consequences could extend beyond City Hall and into the wider Democratic brand. And with that, we wrap today's breakdown. If this episode hit the mark, go ahead and tap like and subscribe for more. Appreciate you watching. See you next time.